Hello and welcome to your 42nd SQL Server tutorial. I believe it's 42nd. Today, my name is Johnny DeLuca, and today I want to talk to you about using date and time scalar functions, built-in scalar functions, and as I believe I briefly covered in the tutorial on creating your first table, SQL Server allows date and time variables to be stored in several formats. Now, while you're able to store date and time values in almost any possible format, it's optimal to use SQL Server functions to return date and time values in a format that meets your needs. Using these functions, you can do the following. Number one, return date and time values of varying precision. Number two, you can return parts of date and time values. Third, you can derive date and time values from date and time parts, which is a new feature in SQL Server 2012. Fourth, you can get date and time differences. Fifth, modify date and time values. And sixth, validate date and time values. So, right here we have an example of returning date and time values. So go ahead and open your query editor and then execute this following statement. Alright, let's do that. Okay, see the result. Alright, so the result we see is a single date and time value equal to the date and time that we executed the query. And yeah, here we go. There we go. We're good to go. Okay. You should notice immediately that the precision of the values is different. The getDate function returns a datetime data type, and the system SYS_datetime function returns a different datetime 27. The latter of the two is a more precise value, which is the reason you see more numbers after the final decimal place. So you see here this is a more precise way of doing it. But for many circumstances, this works just fine. So we'll get into the why of that maybe in a later tutorial, or maybe later in this tutorial. I haven't decided, but that's all you need to know about that for right now. Now let's take a look at an example that returns parts of data and time values. So to do that, to return parts of data and time values, let's get rid of this. Let's go grab this block of code here, copy that, paste that guy in. Okay, now let's go ahead and execute this. Alright, now, the return values for the first three functions, day, month, and year, are obvious. However, the last two functions, date name and date part, offer a little more functionality. Unlike the first three functions, both date name and date part accept an additional parameter known as date part. The date part parameter tells the function which part of the date to return. And now I'll show you a table that lists all the available date parts that can be used as parameters. So we'll take a look at that. Here we go right here. The date part, and we have the abbreviation, quarter, month, day of year, week, weekday, hour, minute, second, millisecond, microsecond, nanosecond, and so on and so forth. So there we go. Okay, let's go back here, and I just want to further break this down. Okay, so we can see day, 7, month, December, year, and 13th, Saturday, date part, and so on, and see, so this all corresponds to the code we just executed. Alright, pretty cool. Going back to this table here, each date part argument typically returns an integer value. However, you may have noticed that string values are included in this figure. When using month and weekday as the date part argument for the date name function, this is the main distinction between the two functions. The date part function returns the date type as an integer value. since the date name function can return string values, its return type is nvarchar. That's N-V-A-R-C-H-A-R. Some people call it varchar, whatever you want to call it. Oh, and something, I don't know if I mentioned this before, I probably did, and many of you probably know this, but some of you may not. But I mentioned that you may notice that string values are included in this figure. Now you might be going, what's a string? Okay, a string is like, for instance, Saturday is a string, and 14 is an integer. And like I said, each date part argument typically returns an integer value. A numeric value, however, string values are also included. So basically just pieces of text is what I mean by that. And any of you that have any background in any programming language already know that. So, but anyways, I don't try to assume. Okay, so now from there, I want to go over how to use the date from parts scalar function. It's going to be this block of code we're going to grab right here. So let's go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and copy this guy. Alright. Go back here. This guy. Paste him in. Now, so prior to the release of SQL Server 2012, you could derive dates from other values and expressions with T-SQL. Now, while it was possible, this approach often required lots of coding and in some cases produced inconsistent results. So as a result, with SQL Server 2012, Microsoft has included several new functions that allow you to derive date and time parts. And that's what we're going to take a look at right here. So let's go ahead and copy this down and go ahead and execute. Alright. Now, the results for this query resembles what we see right here. Now you can produce varying date and time values of different precision levels by using built-in functions instead of writing custom T-SQL code. So that's pretty cool. So something to take note of, use the date from parts scalar function, and by doing so you can produce varying date and time values of different precision levels by using these built-in functions instead of having to do painstaking, laborious, custom T-SQL code. Well, it wasn't that painstaking, but this definitely saves you some time. Okay, now, the next thing I want to show you is how to perform date calculations and validation. So, let's check that one out. Get rid of this. Let's go grab this block of code here. Alright, copy that. Paste that in our query execution window. Okay, so go ahead and type all this in and then go ahead and execute. Okay, now using date diff, you are able to find out how many days, months, or years exist between two date values. The date part argument, which is DD, determines which date part to return. Date add also uses a date part argument. However, it can add or subtract from a date value. The EO month function, all caps, EO month, which is new to SQL Server 2012, returns the last day of the month for a given date value. Finally, you can determine whether or not a date is valid by using the isDate function. And what we see right here shows the results of the query we just executed. Notice that 1 is returned when the date is valid and 0 is returned for invalid dates. So, boom, boom. Alright, pretty cool. So now you know how to perform date calculations and validations. We went over differencing, modifying, and validating date values. I showed you how to use the date from parts scalar function. What else did we cover? I showed you how to return parts of data and time values. and I showed you how to return date and time values. So pretty cool. And thanks for stopping by. In my next tutorial, I think I will be covering using conversion functions like cast and convert. So I'll see you there. Thanks for stopping by.